Okay, brothers, what is up there? This is I, J-Man Time, and today we're going to go over some of the rare military weapons and civilian tech that have been developed by Ugandan civilians. Since the year 2009, Uganda has its own military, and the Ugandan army is funded pretty well by the US, Russia, China, and even countries like Italy. But over the many years, there have been some Ugandan civilians, or patriots, who have been developing their own weapons for potential mass production to be used by the Ugandan armed forces. And there also have been civilians that have been developing their own civilian weapons and vehicles that could be used by Ugandans. So let's go over some of the rare weapons, brothers, of Uganda, and the civilian tech, including aircraft, homemade planes, and helicopters made by Ugandan civilians. And as always, these are the rare ones that you never hear about. And the first weapon system on the list comes from a Ugandan rocketeer, or rocket man, by the name of Anatoli Kiiza. Anatoli Kiiza is a Ugandan rocketeer, or rocket engineer, who has been working on a series of experimental military rockets. And the first one on the list is the M7, also known as the SAM missile. And this is an experimental cell phone guided, or iPhone guided, dual purpose anti-tank, anti-aircraft, and a general purpose artillery missile developed between 2012 and 2015. The missile system, according to Anatoli Kiiza, has a diameter of about 180 to 200 millimeters and has a 100 kilogram warhead. This missile is literally designed to be launched and controlled via your cell phone, or iPhone in this case, using the iPhone touchscreen and GPS system. The missile reportedly has a range of 450 miles and only needs a crew of one. This experimental missile system is so advanced that it doesn't even need a launcher. It's so simple, it can be launched from an iron board, like you see in the photos. Only a few prototypes have been developed by Anatoli Kiiza between 2012 and 2015. But the Ugandan government has never tested his missile, even though he has requested for the missile to be tested multiple times. This isn't the only missile he has developed. Way back in 2012, he unveiled his first prototype, known as the M1. The M1 was an all-aluminum missile made using recycled materials, because Mr. Kiiza is also an environmentalist who wants to protect Uganda's environment. He believes that all of this junk laying around should be recycled, and he has made two missile concepts, at least the first two, that use recycled materials, mostly aluminum and steel and iron, but the first missile being made completely out of recycled aluminum. This missile system was examined by the Ugandan government at one point, but was never taken seriously. And this isn't the only missile system that Mr. Anatoli Kiiza has developed. He has developed another missile system that is even more out of this world than the first two. The next missile system developed by this man, this rocketeer, is the sniper missile system, developed between 2012 and 2015. Now listen here. This was an experimental cell phone guided anti-aircraft machine gun missile. Yes, you heard me. Machine gun missile, a missile that is supposed to have a machine gun fitted within it. So it is basically a reusable missile. Is pretty much what it is. It's a cell phone guided reusable anti-aircraft missile fitted with a machine gun. The machine gun is both for offensive and defensive purposes. So it's designed to shoot down enemy planes, but the machine gun can also take out missiles that were sent to intercept the sniper missile system itself. And just like the SAM missile, it has a range of 450 miles, according to Mr. Kiiza. And only one prototype was ever made. Unfortunately, back in 2016, Anatoli Kiiza was arrested twice by the Ugandan authorities because they didn't want his missiles falling into the hands of terrorist groups operating in the country. For those of you who don't know, Uganda does have a terrorist problem in the case of jihadis from Al-Qaeda and ISIS-linked organizations, and also a Christian army known as the Lord's Resistance Army, led by Joseph Kony. Remember Kony 2012? Well, the Ugandan government didn't want Anatoli Kiiza's missiles falling into the hands of Joseph Kony and his child soldier army. So as a result, Mr. Anatoli Kiiza was forced to shut down his missile project. And since 2016, there have been no more updates on either the SAM or sniper missile systems. But if they were developed, they would be some of the most advanced missiles on Earth. Imagine a future conflict between Uganda and the US, where American helicopters are being shot down by machine gun armed sniper missiles, and American tanks are being destroyed by cell phone guided SAM missiles. On top of that, both of these missile systems are made using recycled materials. So Mr. Anatoli Kiiza is pretty much the Captain Planet of Uganda. He's a planeteer. You can be one too. And saving our planet is the thing to do. Looting and polluting is not the way. Hear what Captain Kiiza has to say. The power is yours, brother. And let's move on to the next system. The next system on the list actually comes from a Ugandan government-funded space program known as the Africa Space Research Program of Uganda. And this is partially funded by the government. It is actually part of a college/community college program where students come in from the college and show off their own concepts. And these concepts are expanded upon and made real. And one of these projects unveiled back in 2013 was one of Uganda's first indigenously made military drones, known as the ASRP TOKWATAKO. And a TOKWATAKO is an unmanned aerial vehicle that was developed by some of the students from the local college who were a part of this Africa Space Research Program. In 2013, they came up with this UAV that was meant to be used by the Ugandan military or tested by the Ugandan military. This UAV reportedly has an endurance of 7 hours. This UAV also has GPS. It also has 2 cameras for surveillance and monitoring. So this here is probably the most feasible weapon, as it is pretty much a drone, and drones are pretty easy to manufacture. But unfortunately, the Ugandan military has never accepted the drone. And the last reports of this aircraft was from 2014. So in the last 7 or 8 years, there hasn't been any updates on this experimental TOKWATAKO drone. If you ask me personally, this here is probably the easiest one to manufacture or at least adopt. Keep in mind, the Ugandan military doesn't have that many drones, and most of the drones they do have are imported from the US and Europe and China. So I think the Ugandans should take the TOKWATAKO UAV system seriously, but I don't think they will. But it is one of the more advanced civilian projects to come out of Uganda, a literal civilian-designed UAV or unmanned aerial vehicle. I'm pretty sure if this Africa Space and Research Program were to keep developing this drone, they could come up with an attack drone or a UCAV version of this vehicle. And if you thought that was something, if you thought that was the most advanced Uganda could get, you ain't seen nothing yet. Uganda still has more tricks up its sleeve. The next aircraft project on this list is one that is so advanced that only a single mock-up has been made because it's too advanced for even Uganda to manufacture. And that is the Africa Skyhawk from 2009 through 2015. And this here is an experimental rocket-powered space reconnaissance aircraft developed by a man named Mr. Nasimba back in 2009 originally on paper. But over the years, he has been constructing a mock-up of this Africa Skyhawk. And it was actually part of the same Africa Space and Research Program I mentioned earlier. This aircraft here is basically the R-Wing of Uganda. Remember the R-Wing from Star Fox? That's basically this aircraft. According to Mr. Nasimba, this here is an experimental space reconnaissance aircraft designed to monitor incoming asteroids and meteorites and possibly destroy them if it has the right weapons fitted to it. This is just a concept aircraft. It is basically like the German World War II era Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. It is an experimental aircraft that hasn't really taken off yet. And even if it did take off, it's not that refined. This mock-up here is made out of wood and aluminum, so it's just a mock-up. Mr. Nasimba at one point was looking for funding. One of his main problems is he doesn't have anyone who can develop the proper jet engines or rocket engines that could power this Ugandan R-Wing, this Skyhawk, or the Africa Skyhawk. And as a result, the project has mostly remained as a simple mock-up. Now, the aircraft actually made news back in 2015, and the Ugandan Prime Minister actually came out to see the aircraft. He couldn't believe that a Ugandan was coming up with an aircraft that could monitor and intercept incoming asteroids and meteorites. And just like I said, this aircraft here, in terms of concept, is literally just the R-Wing from Star Fox 64. This is the Star Fox 64 of Uganda. But unfortunately, it is only a simple mock-up, an idea. But if Mr. Nasimba actually got the funding, you could be looking at the real-world equivalent of the R-Wing. If this aircraft was real, what would the U.S. Air Force be able to do? There would be nothing the U.S. could do to stop it. I mean, just think about it. The Africa Skyhawk would dominate the F-35 Lightning with no problem. It would destroy the Russian Pak-50. That plane already has some problems. Even the Chinese J-20 would be annihilated. Winnie the Pooh would facepalm at his own aircraft if he ever had to fight a war with Uganda. If China had to fight Uganda with this aircraft, an actual working prototype aircraft, they would be doomed. I mean, it's an aircraft designed to intercept asteroids and meteorites. You know how fast an asteroid or a meteorite moves? You're talking hundreds of miles an hour. So this aircraft here would have a speed of like Mach 1000 or something. No F-35 or Pak-50 or J-20 would be able to touch the Africa Skyhawk if it was ever turned into a legit military-grade aircraft. For now, it is just an experimental, or at least mock-up, of a space reconnaissance aircraft. But we all know, if this project were to ever be taken seriously, it would be turned into a full-on military-grade aircraft at some point. But there you have it, the Africa Skyhawk, from 2009 to 2015. Mr. Nasimba also developed an experimental space probe and reconnaissance satellite back in 2014. This is known as the Katamilla. And the Katamilla is literally a space observation probe and reconnaissance satellite. So not only did this man come up with the R-Wing of Uganda, but he also came up with a future Ugandan space probe and reconnaissance satellite, something that the Ugandan government itself hasn't even begun doing. So Mr. Nasimba is pretty advanced when it comes to at least the idea of potential civilian and military grade weapons, as both of these are technically civilian projects. Remember, the first aircraft on this list is just a space shuttle or a spaceship, and the second one is a space probe. We all know all of this will lead to military applications down the line, and only one prototype of the Katamilla has been built so far. And just like the Africa Skyhawk, it also made headlines in Uganda. And the Ugandan Prime Minister actually came out to see it, along with other members of the Ugandan government. So the Katamilla, along with the Skyhawk, has at least gotten the attention it needed, but still, they need funding if they want to get off the ground. And now, let's go on to some other Ugandan-made utility vehicles in this case. Some other Ugandan-made inventions. And now let's go over to the Ugandan MASH helicopters. We all remember watching the hit TV show MASH, You remember the intro with that helicopter, you know. Yeah, the helicopter is known as a Bell 47 and was actually used during the Korean War. Well, in Uganda, a lot of Ugandan civilian machinists and inventors have been manufacturing their own improvised helicopters or homemade helicopter concepts. Actually, since before 2009, but since 2009, many of these helicopters have actually begun to fly. And let's go over some of the Ugandan homemade MASH helicopters. And the first helicopter on the list is the Ambarora P7 by a man named Joseph Kiiza. The Ambarora P7 is an experimental all-aluminum and steel touring helicopter that was developed between 2015 and 2016. This is a prototype for a potential civilian utility and touring helicopter. Mr. Kiiza wants to manufacture helicopters for the Ugandan public and potentially for the Ugandan military, as the Ugandan military mostly has old, outdated helicopters. Now, this aircraft here was made completely out of recycled components. The hull is made of aluminum, and the engine and most of the machinery is made out of recycled bicycle and motorcycle components. So this man here built what is essentially the Ugandan MASH helicopter out of aluminum and motorcycle components. The speed of this helicopter is unknown, neither is the range, as he has never stated any of these specifications. But he has made at least 3 helicopters in total, with a 4th one being developed as of now in 2021. Now, the P7 actually flew on TV once, back in 2016, but unfortunately the helicopter was not strong enough and only managed to stay in the air for a few minutes before crashing to the ground. Mr. Kiiza was injured but eventually survived and recovered. And since then, he has been working on 2 more prototypes. The second one is known as the Ambarora P8 or the Kiiza 2, and in 2021 he has come out with another unnamed prototype that he is still working on now. So he hasn't given up the dream. He has not given up the dream of creating Uganda's first line of civilian touring and utility helicopters that could be used by both civilians and potentially the Ugandan military. And he is still inventing to this day. In fact, Mr. Kiiza has also been developing his own experimental brand of motorcycles and automobiles. So he is going beyond the call of duty for Uganda. He is showing you, brothers, the way. He is showing us the way of the Ugandan spirit. And that brings us to the last one on the list. Probably the most advanced helicopter in terms of its design when it comes to potential civilian and utility helicopters from Uganda. And this is the UCTI Ukulele Kopio. And the Ukulele Kopio as an experimental utility and touring helicopter from 2016. It was actually developed by another program known as the United Community Technology Initiative. And this is actually a group in Uganda. This is actually a privately funded group of Ugandans who have been manufacturing their own experimental civilian vehicles. This here being the Ugandan equivalent of the MASH helicopter in the 21st century. This is basically the Ugandan equivalent of the Bell P47. The only problem is, unlike the Ambarora, this aircraft is having a hard time getting up the ground. The main problem is, the 3 men who developed this aircraft don't have the money for a proper helicopter engine. You know, helicopters are powered by turbofans or turbo engines nowadays, but they don't have the money for a turbojet engine, and instead they had to build their own engine from scratch. And so this helicopter has had a hard time getting up the ground because the engine is simply too underpowered. So this aircraft was developed in 2016, and as of 2021 they are still working on it. So they haven't given up the idea of making this a real utility helicopter that could be manufactured in Uganda. And this helicopter was developed by 3 friends, actually. 3 men by the name of Anatoli Kiiza, Salango, and Miyuko. And these are all 3 men who have spent the last 4 to 5 years working on this experimental civilian utility helicopter that could be used as a military helicopter if it were perfected and mass-produced. But that's basically it. These were the Ugandan rare weapons and experimental civilian vehicles that have been developed by Ugandans without the assistance of the Ugandan government or military. If I had to choose one of these, it would clearly be the Africa Skyhawk, because who wouldn't want the Ugandan equivalent of the R-Wing from Star Fox 64 in real life? And these men have made all of these vehicles and weapons using recycled material, because these men are all environmentalists in a way. So they are kind of like the Planeteers from Captain Planet, but the inventor equivalent of that. They are Planeteers, you can be one too, because saving our planet is the thing to do. Looting and polluting is not the way, and this is what Uganda has to say. The power is yours, brother. And these Ugandans have been showing us the way. So what do you all think of these experimental weapons and vehicles? Please tell me in the comments section below. And until next time, this was J-Man Time, signing off.